Hello, and welcome to our final recap video. This time we'll be looking at weeks 7 and 8 before we make it into the top 32. After this, hopefully this weekend, we will have our top 32 video posted. It will be a live battle, so I'll be recording as I play, and win or lose, you will be seeing that battle probably on Sunday or Monday. So, without stalling any longer, let's get into it. And speaking of stall, our opponent does have a Dondozo, and the first lesson I learned from this battle that we did get quite unfortunate in, you see this first time we get a Spadef drop instantly, so our Gastrodon can no longer beat our opposing Sandy Shocks. Um, the first topic to talk about is predictability. So at this point, there are 6 replays that I could go back and watch based on how my opponent plays, and I found that he had a pretty consistent way that he liked to play. So a lot of my team building this week was actually to prep around that. So a big thing I noticed was he almost always won with Cursed on Dozo with some variation of Terra Blast, Water Move, Body Press, Curse, Rest, and Sleep Talk. Didn't always have Sleep Talk, didn't always have coverage, sometimes just ran water coverage, but almost always used that to win. Other than one other time, I believe he did use Shell Smash, Cloister, and he used Focus Sash. So, keeping in mind those are his 2 biggest win cons, I built a lot of my team to help me deal with that. So my Gastrodon always 1v1s a non-steel type Dondozo, and luckily for me, he did bring Ghost. Ghost I thought made a lot of sense, because my 2 easiest ways to beat a cursed Dondozo were Boom Burst, Terra Normal, Dudunsparce, which I did bring, and a Sacred Sword Gallade because it pierces past the defense boost. So Ghost made a whole lot of sense, but luckily we were able to counter it. The second kind of topic of this is speed tiers. Obviously, my opponent's speed tiers are way better than mine. So if you look at both of our speeds in a vacuum, I have 2 Pokemon above base 100, where my opponent had a lot of Pokemon sitting right around that base. So he had the Sandy Shocks at 101, he had the Typhlosion in the high 90s, and then he had Staraptor at 100. So the way I got around that was with a double Scarf team. Both my Magneton and my Gallade were Scarfed to help me deal with that. Right here, I do set up a spike with the Gastrodon. I know that he likes to bring a Shell Smash, Focus Sash, Cloister quite often, and he wants to get rid of it with the Rapid Spin Serena so that he can set up and win in the late game. But then opts to not go for the Rapid Spin. So I did want to get that spike up again later, but since he didn't get rid of it, I don't have to. And now I don't have to worry about a Focus Sash Cloister in the late game. So here I do knock out all his Pokemon. All he has left is this Cloister and the Dondozo. I do just Boom Burst everything with the Dunsparce. It's kind of free, and he does knock me out with the Cloister. I had to stay in so he couldn't get set up, but now Gallade threatens him out. I can go for a Leaf Blade. It's no longer super effective on the Dondozo, but I know that if it does come in, I'll always have that free Gastrodon switch. And something funny is the way Terra types work with certain attacks. So both myself and my opponent didn't think about it, but when you become a Ghost type, what Curse does changes. So instead of boosting his stats, he curses me like a ghost. Um, and it's funny because in this situation, it could have actually won him the game had I not gotten that spike up. Because of that spike, his Cloister is no longer Sash, so I can still hit it with a Clear Smog here, which is kind of the last lesson, is know how to win. Know how to not let the game slip through your fingers. I could have easily Earth Powered here. It might have KO'd, probably didn't. The safer play was always a Clear Smog, so he couldn't have his speed in the end, and I could clean up with Gallade. So this was quite a clean game. We're now at 6-1, so we're at least likely to make it into top cut. Winning the next game, though, is what's going to determine if we're guaranteed or if we're going to be holding our breath. So let's get to that. Alright, and here we are at our final game. This determines if we're guaranteed to make it into top cut or if we'll be holding our breath, hoping that our previous opponents did better than what our opponents did. Because the only way to win through 6-2 is with better resistance score. So your opponent's getting more wins than other people's opponents, meaning that you had a tougher time getting to 6-2 than other people, or you beat better people in the process. So our final opponent, first lesson I would say before starting the battle, even though I will, so it's quite a long one, is my opponent only ever brought Tatsugiri a single time, and he never brought Pikachu. So I didn't really prep any of my team around those 2 Pokemon, assuming he wouldn't even bring them. Another assumption I could make based on his past games was that he'd like to use Clodsire with Resist Berries, which is why I went for Trick here. But he also always used a Terra type with low kicks that was already at stab typing, which is smart. Low kicks is a Pokemon that if you double that stab typing, you just burst through resistances with that Tinted Lens ability. So I thought it made a lot of sense that he used that, but because he only ever used stab typings, I could actually take advantage of that by knowing he would go either Dark or Bug in this matchup, and I had more resistances to Bug, especially I had two 4x resistances, or at least one 4x resistance in Talonflame that was more likely to come in. So I thought he was more likely to go Dark, and he ended up going Dark. Whereas with my team, Terra Dudunsparce, other than normal, I don't think I ever repeated a Terra type. I always brought something that was good against my opponent, whether I had an attack that benefited from the type or not. So for this matchup, as I'm about to show, I was actually Terra Ground. So I knew that I wanted Dudunsparce to set up and win and beat the Klefki 1v1, as well as beating the Clodsire. So I knew I couldn't let it get paralyzed by the Klefki. That meant I either had to run Electric, Ground, or Dark typing to get around the Thunder Wave. And at the end of the day, against his team, I thought Ground made the most sense, and it did end up working out pretty well since he didn't bring the Tatsugiri. So, second lesson at this point in the match was setting up for your win conditions. So this to Dunsparce, super janky IV or an EV spread, but it was set up to always take special hits from an uninvested Klefki, take physical hits from an uninvested Clodsire, and take some hits from Uxie as well without losing its substitute. So I could always take 2 hits. And against these Pokemon, if I hit them with Glare and then start hitting them with Headbutt, as I'm doing now, eventually I do knock them out. And you'll see this is the first opponent I've had that did get not lucky, but did eventually break through the paralyses. So I was able to set up another sub, but this Dudunsparce doesn't have another way to heal outside of leftovers, so I couldn't just keep repeatedly substituting. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm paralyzing every Pokemon on this team so that I can beat them all with the Dunsparce. And if he leaves something in on it, whether it be the Klefki, the Uxie with lowered stats, or the Clodsire, I know I can set up coils and eventually beat down his whole team because it's also very physically based. So another thing I brought to help the Dunsparce win and to help it get set up was a Grimmsnarl that had Parting Shot. So with Parting Shot, I reduced my opponent's offensive stats by 1 each, which turns a lot of roles in my favor outside of Pokemon like this opposing Serena, who's really giving me trouble. But as soon as Serena goes down, Ground type to Dunsparce really just kind of wins. So I knew the win condition was to eventually beat it. I didn't mind to try to Volt Switch on Clodsire. This is actually the 4th Clodsire we played. Out of 8 matches, we went against 4 Clodsires. So I don't know if that's lucky or unlucky, but I brought Magnet Rise Magneton pretty much every time due to that. And you finally see we get our first KO. This is quite a long game. Kind of how I designed my team was to just repeatedly take hits, get up screens, and then really not let him set up. So that was the goal of this game, was I needed to get set up before he did. So I weakened this Uxie a lot, and because of this, even super effective hits should never be able to break my sub onto Dunsparce. We see this Dazzling Gleam does a whole 7%, and then he does reveal Energy Ball as super effective coverage that does 15. So it even takes 2 Energy Balls to get rid of the sub, and even more other hits. So he does just decide to switch out, reset those drops, because then Energy Ball is guaranteed to break the sub. And at this point, I really just start setting up on this Clodsire. Like, I know that it's Choice Scarf locked. I locked it in immediately with Gallade. So all I really have to do is coil up, and suddenly Low Kicks, Talonflame, even Serena are not threats to my substitute anymore. They won't be able to break it, at least in one hit. So it does get a little stally here for a few moments. I do set up against him. And another thing I kind of wanted to talk about was forcing prep against my opponent. So something we saw in the other matches is my opponents, when they brought Terra types, they would bring Terra types that helped them against the one Mon that walled them. So if I didn't have Gastrodon, they would have no reason to bring Terra Grass, and they would be able to bring a better Terra type into the rest of my team. So building a team that forces specific prep for each Pokemon, I think makes a lot of sense. So another example is last week, earlier in this video, my opponent had the opportunity to bring Knacklestack, and it's such a specific threat that you want to bring Covert Cloak for. So I actually had a Covert Cloak Grimmsnarl last week. Knacklestack didn't even show up, so it was kind of useless. It was, it still helps against like no burns from flamethrowers, things like that, but it's obviously not the optimal item. So essentially, forcing specific prep like that is very useful. But now we see Dudunsparce is now at max attack, max defense. My opponent pivoted with low kicks. I think he could have just knocked me out with Uxie, but decided instead to pivot around a little. And yeah, he goes for a couple energy balls here. The headbutt doesn't even knock it out. It does 70% at +6, which is so funny. This was not a very offensively invested Dudunsparce, slightly. And so the only way I lose the 6-0 at this point is from a crit. So I do just glare just to be safe. My team wins a lot easier and wins with 5-0 if I do glare first. So you will see, I will just paralyze his last Pokemon. I will headbutt the Talonflame, and we do win 7-1. We only had that one loss in week 3 to a very strong Braviary team that brought a ton of fast taunt against me. I think we've learned our lessons since then. Our team has gotten better, and I will throw the final stats up on the board. It's crazy to Dunsparce with almost double the KOs of anybody else on the team. Super exciting to see. I'm so glad I got to use this Pokemon in this tournament. Also, there was supposed to be a redraft between the Swiss rounds and top tier, and they ended up canceling that, which honestly was music to my ears. I was so worried I wouldn't get to Dunsparce and Gallade back. They've been crutches for me this season. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed. We will have the top 32 match going up, and if we win, we'll have even more matches. So we'll see you there.